Hi, David. Welcome to the Impact Revolution channel. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much
Hi,
for coming.
Yoshi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, real thanks. No, it's absolutely my pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. We have been chatting already, and I could chat for you for hours, I'm sure. But let's make it this briefly at 30 minutes. So before we go into details to more professional business related questions, David, can I ask you a couple of questions just for the audience to know you a bit better?
Yeah, by all means, carry on.
Okay. All right. So, if you could wake up anywhere in the world tomorrow, David, where it would be and why?
Oh, do you know, here
Uh-huh.
where I am,
Okay.
I've
Cool.
I've worked for a long time to create a life that I enjoy, and I've got a wonderful family and wonderful kids, and I enjoy what I do every day for my work. So why, yeah, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Okay. Great. All right. Thank you. So that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And it makes sense. It makes sense. You work for it, and you are there for a reason, right? So, that's a nice answer. Thanks. The next one, because you have children, and you say already you have children, and most of the people answer this question with, when I say, well, what's the happiest moment, they say the children. All right, so I'm going to ask you a different one, David. If you had all the money in the world, David, what would you do?
Well, I guess one of my long-term ambitions and the reason why I want our business to be very successful is to invest. And I'd love to invest in more neuroscientific studies to prove the mechanisms of confidence. So I've got a mantra kind of thing that's evolved over the years
Uh
because it's
huh.
just a bit frustrating the way we do things in the world today. And I'd like to think at some point in the future we could learn enough about child development and brain development to stop having to fix adults and just stop breaking children in the first place. So, I think if I could have all the money in the world, it would be to invest in accelerating that process of helping the world learn more about brain function so we can do a better job as parents, as teachers, as sports
Leaders.
coaches, as leaders in business and politicians, I guess I should add to that.
Beautiful. Yeah, definitely politicians. Yeah. All right, David, that's great. So, my next question probably similar to what you just answered, but just wanted to make sure. What is your why? Why do you do what you do, David?
Ooh, I could go off for hours now telling you life stories. Do you know what's fascinating, Yoshi, is that I'm driven by a story that I was told
Okay.
probably
Cool.
when I was 7 or 8 years old. Now, and it's kept me going all this time. I'm 53 this year, so
Okay.
it's been a
You don't
very
look like.
powerful story, right? And I mean, I can't say names and things, but basically there's lots went on. My mum and dad. I'm the youngest of 7 children. Okay,
Okay. All
so
right.
my parents were kind of very Victorian influenced and lived through the war and the Second World War. So my mum was orphaned by the time she was 12, and that had a big impact on her own confidence levels. And my dad went through some traumatic events in the army out in the Middle East and came back with quite a few challenges in life, which made him find it hard to hold a job. He always had a great boast. He said, "My longest job was a year, and my shortest job was a minute," because somebody insulted him as he walked through the door, and he said, "I'm not working here," and turned around and walked out again. Um, but it led to some pretty hard times. I remember having to go and kill rabbits to eat because there was no food in the cupboards,
Okay.
and we had to grow our own vegetables. And so it was an interesting childhood. Fortunately, we had the space to do it. We lived in the middle of nowhere, so we had enough garden to grow vegetables and things.
Cool.
But whilst I was growing up feeling, very hard done by, because my friends oh, I had new shoes and I had cardboard in the bottom of mine to stop the water coming through the holes. Inherited my brother's trousers, and by the time they got too short because they sat above my ankles before we got the next lot. So it was
All
a
right.
very different childhood. And at the same time, I was told this story. Um, and in context of that background, it had a really big impact on me. And it was that years and years before, that
Mhm.
in my family, a business had been started and it had become very successful, multi-billion-pound turnover, international concern.
In
And the
the time
story
of
went,
your childhood, you meant like your parents or
no,
someone
I
else?
think it was my great-great-grandfather.
Ah, great.
So, and
Okay,
over
sorry.
two or three generations, this business had grown exponentially
Mm,
and become a massive
all right.
concern. And the story goes, and there's no guarantee that any of this is valid, but it was true to me at the time. And I think the way the brain works, that's important. If it doesn't matter if it's true or not in reality, is if it's true to you, makes a big difference.
That's right.
And
I
and
know,
I
I
was
know.
told this story that the other half of the family that who are obviously multimillionaires and had swimming pools in mansions and things. The way they
Mhm.
had got that was because my great-great-grandfather had taken his brother under his wing as the company had grown. But I think it was about 12 years into the establishment of the business, and my forebear who had set it up had worked very hard and was very tired. So he decided he was going to take a long holiday and have a couple of months off with his family and go from Hastings to Wales for this holiday. And
Okay.
it, it he'd come back basically, and his brother had forged his signature, taken over the company, sold his house, and left him destitute. And he had tried to start again, and then obviously that he'd done very well. My granddad was chief tea taster at London Docks, and there was still some achievement in the family. And then my dad had his issues coming out of the army. So, for
All right.
me, I perhaps put two and two together and got five, because I was very young. But that injustice of somebody being treated well and being dishonest in business made me really angry. And I thought, I'm going to grow up and show the world that you can be nice and still be successful in business. And that was the thought that went through my head. And really, all the way through my career, that's been a driving force. So that's my one. That's what keeps me going.
Yeah, that's funny. It reminded me to this book I read a few months ago. It was The Values Factor by Dr. Dermentini. I don't remember the name, but he was saying that our biggest hurt, or injury, is what becomes our biggest value, because the
Mm.
perception that we think that we have lacked something, or that something was not fair or was not good for us, or we lack for it, or we crave it, or we need it, is what we can our biggest value. So love it. Thank you so much for sharing that story, David. It's beautiful. Yeah.
It's what's missing for humanity as well, right? It's not just about us. It's if you
Mhm.
see that pattern and it's having a detrimental impact in the performance of businesses, just
And
because people aren't being treated the right way, then that's it can become that value can be become bigger than ourselves.
yes, no, definitely agree. I think is the biggest problem that we are facing today, and that's also the purpose of this Impact Revolution channel. To redefine this business mindset that is traditional and industrial, that is not working anymore, and is not going to be sustainable in the long term.
Mm.
They- All right, thank you so much. So, what are your biggest lessons learned in those 53 years of, testing and checking and experimenting and learning?
Oh, wow. Um, Good question. Um,
Hmm.
53 years of lessons learned. What's the biggest one? Ah, I don't. I think I know it sounds really cliche, but
Uh-huh.
probably I know. I go back to the old Delphic maxim, right? Know thyself.
Mm.
The more you
Mm.
can
Mm.
understand, and again, this is why I love neuroscience because it
Yeah.
explains a lot of really complicated psychology that confuses a lot of people, and it just puts the facts behind it. The more I've learned, I guess, so the biggest thing I've learned is learn more. To answer your question specifically,
Mm,
I ended up studying philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience, as well as looking at East and West history and philosophy and religions. So I went through the Japanese history because of my interest in Toyota and lean manufacturing,
okay.
and also all the Western history. So I went back 2,000 years, pretty much in both. Looked at way that the sort of eight-level social structure of Japan evolved around samurais and shoguns and whatever else. But also looked at that all in context of religion and how the Shinto approach kind of or philosophy evolved around Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism and just I don't know, I just my brain, because this is what brains do, looked for patterns and found patterns and started
Hmm.
making connections. And rather than just being, an English educated secondary school guy that went through an engineering apprenticeship, I was able to understand engineering principles that I recognized in philosophical debates, or
Uh-huh.
presentations from all the philosophers across the ages. And then once I started studying psychology, I started drawing parallels between what the psychologists had observed and what the philosophers had seen that reflected religion in general.
Uh-huh.
So and then when neuroscience came along for me 20 years ago, it was like the light got switched on because all of these things that my brain was trying to make sense of and was difficult and confusing and came with subjective and ambiguous language, including all the acronyms and the language that goes in business, right? You know,
Uh-huh.
as I started learning about the brain, it just all made sense. It all just kind of fell into place. And
Yes. Uh-huh. I'm
do you
laughing,
know?
sorry, because I have a very similar journey. I was a mechanical engineer, and then I resigned. Then I studied coaching. Then I studied everything I could about the mind, psychology, business, and everything is related, right? The mind, the
Yeah.
teams, because it's like collective mindset at the end, and the yeah, it's the mind. It's everything is about the mind,
And I think in
and
Toyota
what.
they refer to it as principle-based practice, right? So it means there's principles underneath behavior and action. And if
Mhm.
you can identify those common principles or values, depending on what language register you want to use to describe them, you can kind of recognize patterns. But the
Definitely.
point is that those principles are quite often ambiguous and subjective, like having courage or being loving or caring. What does it mean? So if you put the neuroscience to it, you can then say, if somebody trusts somebody else, this is the response mechanism. These are the chemicals that are released in the brain. So we can put scientific facts and proof behind reasons why it's good to trust or have a no blame culture or environment. And in which case,
Mm.
what do you have to do so that the sensory stimulus you provide as a leader doesn't trigger an emotional defensive response in another human brain and trigger the release of the wrong chemicals that don't allow trust to build? So you can just really start to put the mechanics in place and understand the cause effect relationship between inbound sensory stimulus and neurological processing and outbound, responses
Okay.
to other people's behavior. And just
Love
one,
it.
one more thing, Yoshi, as well. I was
Yes,
on a call
please,
with Dr.
David.
Michael Merzenich the
Okay.
other week with a few other people. And what he said was fantastic. And he's quite blunt in his approach because he's probably been around the block enough to be a bit frustrated. And what he said was neuroscience without psychology is stupid, right? Because what's the point of understanding brains if you can't deal with people's issues or help it to improve people's lives and quality of life? But psychology without neuroscience is baseless. Because what's the point of understanding the way people behave and respond if you don't understand that there's this root cause of brain function that sits behind it? And I thought that was absolutely fantastic because it just goes to show we can't be educated in silos. We can't just learn about psychology and ignore everything else. We can't just learn about neuroscience
It's
and ignore
system
everything else.
thinking, right? It's like everything is so complex.
Yeah,
Uh,
we've got to see the relationship. And for me, it's all about relationship, right? It's the relationship of neurons and chemicals. It's the relationship of signals and muscles that operate mouths and choose words. It's therefore that's the sensory stimulus that reaches your ears. Your brain responds to what I'm saying, and one way or another, that inbound, outbound sensory stimulus and relationship between brains is how human beings get on. And if we're
Mm.
talking about change, one thing people can't be is defensive and trying to protect themselves and survive their environment or survive the other person, because they just can't
Yeah.
engage. And if we want collaboration, the first thing is people have to engage with each other. So it's all about relationship.
This is all, yeah. I think it's all about the relationship innerly and then outerly. Once we also have a better relationship with ourselves, because you say know yourself, and this is a question that a friend of mine asked me the other day, and I say know yourself and love yourself, as well. I
Mm.
added a second one because I think it's important, to have forgiveness, like you say in the past, our parents, the culture, and all this crazy stuff that we have in our unconscious mind and subconscious mind that triggers with everything that happens in our environment. We make mistakes, and we react in many occasions unconsciously. So I think also this kindness and self-compassion, I think is important,
Yeah,
David. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my brother gave me. Well, I've got three older brothers, and the eldest one, Paul, who lives now in Australia. When I was about 12 or 13, he gave me the Desiderata, and it starts off go placidly amidst the noise and haste, and be gentle with yourself in the
Uh-huh.
adversity of life, kind of thing, or words to that effect. And that has always been another really good
What is the
paragraph.
name of the book, or the para? Sorry.
It's just a passage. It's called the
Ah,
Desiderata.
okay. The
D
desert passage. Oh.
Desiderata.
All right.
Desiderata.
Cool.
Yeah.
I will look at it. I will look at it. Thank you. Yes, I was thinking, when you say this in the practical ways that you do this in organizations, right? How you make this work between teams and relationships between employees. I was wondering, do you have any favorite practice or favorite lessons learned that you could maybe share for us to implement or for people to implement, David?
Oh, see, that's the question we always get to. Um, yeah, there are loads of things we can do. I mean, but a lot of it is sort of around understanding the neuroscience behind the psychology. So you can encourage people to understand what metacognition is and practice
Mm,
metacognition to really start to connect with that inner voice and think about your thinking, because it's that
mm,
thinking that triggers the neurological response, which alters the chemical state of your brain
sure.
away from homeostasis. And we talk about brain in terms of chemical mix, but in terms of neurotransmitters.
Mm,
But generally speaking, we talk about emotions, right? And they're all one and the same thing. So
mm,
the
mm,
thing for me is it's not about having tools or mantras or bullet point lists. It's about having a common language. And the
common
common language,
mindset, right? And
yeah,
understanding.
or a set
Mm-hmm.
of beliefs. I mean, that's my model, BTFA, is believe,
Mm,
think, feel, act. It's you
mm.
if you
Yeah,
have an
we
established,
all need the foundation, right? The psychological foundation and neuroscience that you say, right? In order
yeah, I
to
mean, it's
move from there.
about having similar wiring patterns in your brain because you've been exposed to similar things, so that you've got similar concepts that your brain's constructing, so that when you predict what's coming next,
Yeah.
it works, and people can be on the same page. But the capacity for the brain to be wired differently is infinite. And so
Sure.
it's infinitely possible for people to even use the same words and be on a different page and not be truly aligned with each other. So easy to miscommunicate.
It's
So
so
if we
easy.
have
Yeah.
a common language, and that language is based in science, then and we keep it simple because it doesn't have to be complex and confusing. We just need to know the basics. If we can
That's
get
right.
people in a business to understand those basics, so they, like you said, accept themselves is one thing, and that's very personal, and but also link that kind of concept to the principle of cultivating a no blame environment or a no blame culture,
Mm,
so
mm.
that you realize how you have to behave as a leader to achieve that end outcome.
Yeah,
And
like
then,
the psychological safety, right? You mean there as well,
yeah,
right?
and
Yeah.
beyond that, what are the triggers that cause people not to feel safe? And that
Sure.
terms
Yeah.
in threat to their ego, their status, their life, whatever else it might be. And again, all of this is still part of relationship. When we get that bit right, you can really build that into your strategy. So, I mean, this is what Toyota have been very successful in doing. They call it Hitozukuri, right? Which is build
Uh-huh.
people. And that's the central tenet to Hoshinkanri, which is their approach to deployment. And look how successful Toyota have been at keeping a high performance culture in place, protecting
Uh-huh.
their workforce in hard times when there's been pandemics and monetary crashes globally. And what they do is they batten down the hatches and protect their people first, whereas everybody else is cutting heads. And it's that capacity to feel safe in your workplace and to know that you're part of something that where other people have got your back. You know, it's
Definitely.
a very
Yeah.
typical, neurological response to again relationship. And one of the biggest travesties, Yoshi, is that we. And again, this tells you the importance and the power of language, right? Do you know George Elton Mayo, the Harvard professor that was behind the Hawthorne experiment and the Hawthorne effect?
Maybe I know the experiment. It sounds familiar, but I don't know the person. Yeah.
Okay, well, basically, I mean, long story short, he went in, made a load of changes, productivity kept going up, turned the lights on and off, all sorts of things going on in terms of seeing productivity go up, and was
Yes,
shocked.
exactly.
When he turned the lights off, the productivity went up again. And like I say, long story short, the byproduct of that was he was an industrial psychologist, an Australian guy that was took a senior position at Harvard in those days,
Mm-hmm.
and what he realised was that it wasn't anything to do with frequency of breaks or rate of work or lighting or any of the other things they spent 6 months experimenting with. It was the attention being paid to the people. They felt part of the experiment. So the productivity was going up as a byproduct of inclusion. And it was the inclusion that was the important bit, and the fact that he was spending time with them and built a relationship with people. So, and his team did too. So, he
One
coined the
of
phrase.
our biggest needs, right? The need to belong. You
Yeah,
need to be
like
like on a
Maslow's
tribe.
hierarchy. Yeah, yeah, tribal
Yeah,
instinct, Maslow's hierarchy.
tribal
We've had
instinct.
all the information, but we just don't do anything about it. But Elton Mayo coined the term HR, and originally it meant human relations, how we relate to ourselves, how we
Really?
relate.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and not many
Okay.
people do. But it's this relationship with self, with others, and with processes and systems that make the difference. And he did fantastic work around that issue. And over the years, that term's been changed, let's say, to be polite, and it's become human resources, and humans aren't something to be considered as a resource. We're innovative.
Mm,
You put an ERP system into a
no,
business and don't put people in there, and what
no,
have you
no,
got? You know,
no. No,
systems
now
remote.
they like you to call it talent. The talent development is like that. Instead of
Yeah,
HR. I think is the new.
everything else in a factory is inert without a human being interacting with it. And
Uh,
in the people process systems mantra that comes from the project management world, we know everything we need to know about systems. We can talk about AI and RPA and the programming and the coding behind systems and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to process, we know all the tools and techniques, from Jidoka to Kaizen to Kanban to whatever else you want to throw in the pot. And when you ask people about people, they say, "Oh, it's an HR thing," or "Oh, we've got to do some psychometric profiling tests," or "We've got to do." It's like, well, hang on a minute. That's a third of your people process systems mantra, right? And we've got no language to understand how the people function. We don't know their coding, their programming, how they function, why they react and behave the way they do, why they go wrong, why they leave. All these things, and we've just got the capacity to add to that pot of language now with neuroscience.
uh, isn't it crazy that we are discussing about this instead of being this normalized everywhere? I sometimes think this way. It's just a thought that came to my mind now, David.
Yeah.
It's like
Well, yeah, you're
everybody
right.
should know this, right?
Yeah, how can you get 50 years down the road after TPS was first noticed after the oil crisis, And do you know what? Taiichi Ono said, and I don't know where I saw it, but I know I saw this quote from Taiichi Ono somewhere in a book that I read many years ago. And he said it's going to take the Western world 40 years to realize what they're missing. And he
Mm.
was wrong, because it's taken us 50 years and we still don't recognize what we're missing.
And I think it will take even longer, Yeah.
Yeah. I
Let's see if
mean,
artificial intelligence, can make this shift quicker, if
mm,
the right people get on the hands on that,
yeah,
and maybe social media maybe can globalize everything and spread it faster. I don't know. Let's see. Very
let's
good,
hope so.
David. We
I think,
have 4 minutes left. I could listen to you and learn from you all day, really. So I wanted to, yes, there is a question I like to ask many people. Is if you were to leave some last words to the world, okay, last big words, a quote or whatever you want, what will you leave?
what would I leave? Last
Yeah.
words. Do you know what? I'd have to go back to my mantra I mentioned earlier. I'd
Mm.
say, don't fix adults, just stop breaking children.
Oh wow, I like that. Mm. Don't fix adults. And yeah, yeah, everything starts in the childhood, right? Mm.
Yeah.
The first seven
You know,
years, yeah, the neuroplasticity is very high, and that's where every or basic programming comes in. Yeah, By the way, do you know any? Oh well, in your experience, how to maybe deal effectively with this kind of early traumas, early programming. Is there any favorite tool or thing that you may have?
oh, I think again, if you want to deal with it clinically, then it's definitely the realm of psychologists, good psychologists that know, about REBT and different methods
Sure.
and
It's
the
not traumatic. Maybe I didn't use the right word. It's something that it became part of our personality. And it's limiting us and it's holding us back to go to the next level, right? So it
Mhm.
was more in the lines of that.
Well, I think there's and do you know what? I saw a great quote the other day on LinkedIn, and
Mhm.
it said, "No one tells you what to do when you reach the edge of your confidence." And I've I've been able to move past my barriers faster and easier the more I've learned about the way my brain works. Because if you understand what's going on internally, then you can go, look, you do, and you do that metacognition. You think about your thinking and think, oh, look, I was just thinking in this way. No wonder I'm now feeling a physical shift in terms of my emotional state, because I've now just wound myself up with that jealousy or that fear or that language in my head is going to have triggered the release of different neurochemicals. So the trick is to understand. It goes back to know thyself. If you can understand, we've got the science now to understand ourselves so much more
Yeah,
clearly. Just doing
yeah,
that is the trick, because that frees you from the limitations that the brain's evolved to. I don't know, leverage in our modern environment. Our brain's not evolved to survive the modern workplace. It's not
mm,
evolved to survive the technology we inundate it with. It's not survived to drive cars. To everything that the brain has to do is faster than happens in nature, and it's stressful. And the more cortisol we release, the more damage we do to cells, and the more substantial health problems we have at a social level. So,
mm.
like heart disease, ovarian polycystic issues, cell wall structure strength. There's all these pathologies and subsequent diseases that are impacted by the chemicals that our brain and our body releases in
Yeah,
response to survival.
they are
So
connected, right? The brain and the body are fully connected. So if mind feed, body feed, mind feed. I
exactly,
normally say
come back to
that. Yeah,
systems thinking. You've got to
yeah,
see the connection between us, our internals, and the reaction of those internals to the outside world. And
uh-huh.
therefore, be as a leader, be responsible and have the enough and the accountability and have the wisdom to look at the long-term outcomes for people and make informed choices. And the best way to have an informed choice in business is to understand how brains function. And I say that after 35 years leading change all around Europe, and now working for the last 4 years with my business partner who used to run Toyota as country president. So, and
I
we're
love
both on
it.
the same page. If that's where
I
we've
totally
got to,
agree. I
I
totally
guess that's
agree.
forward.
We hit the 30 minutes, so I don't know if there is any last words. I think we can leave it like that because it was beautiful.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah, no
thank
problem.
you. Thank you so much, David. It was a pleasure.
Lovely.
Thanks
No,
a lot for your wisdom. Thank
absolutely.
you.
Great to meet you.
Appreciate
Thanks for
it.
inviting me along.